The battlefield was chaos, a storm of fire and steel that split the skies and blackened the earth. The alien queen, Serenia, fought like a goddess of war, her blade shimmering with light that cut through the enemy as if they were shadows. But I saw the exhaustion in her stance, the faltering in her strikes, the cracks forming in the armor she wore so proudly. She was the beacon of her people, the heart of an empire stretched thin by endless war. And now she teetered on the edge of collapse. I, a human soldier far from my own shattered world, could not look away. She was more than a monarch to me. She was the last thread of hope I clung to. When the final blow came that brought her to her knees, the field around us seemed to freeze. The queen had fallen, and everything she stood for trembled on the brink of ruin. I ran to her side through the firestorm, my lungs searing from smoke and my body screaming against the weight of battle. Around us, her guards had either fallen or fled, and the enemy surged closer, drawn to the site of their victory. Serenia tried to rise, her eyes fierce even through pain, but her body betrayed her. I knelt before her, shielding her with my frame as arrows and plasma bolts rained down. Her blood stained the ground, her breaths came ragged, and yet she whispered for me to leave her. I could not. My oath was never sworn in words, but carved into my very soul the moment I saw her stand. Against the tide alone. If the galaxy meant to take her life, it would have to go through me first. The enemy commander, a towering warlord clad in spiked armor, barked an order for her capture. He wanted her alive but broken, dragged through the mud as a trophy. His forces closed in, thinking her reign had ended in that moment of weakness. I tightened my grip on my battered rifle and felt the weight of destiny pressing down on me. I had been many things in my life. Farmer, drifter, soldier, but never had. I stood as anyone's shield. Now I did so without hesitation, because the fire in Serenia's eyes deserved more than humiliation. She had chosen defiance over surrender, and so would I. The clash of steel on steel marked the beginning of something larger than the battle itself. With each strike against me, I realized I was no longer just a man fighting for survival. I was the last wall between the queen and oblivion. The weight of their blades, the burn of their energy blasts, all hammered against my body as though the galaxy itself sought to break me. But in her eyes, I saw strength rekindling, a flicker of faith that I did not expect. For once, she was not the untouchable sovereign. She was a wounded warrior, trusting me with her life. That trust burned through me brighter than any weapon. I fought harder, not for myself, not even for humanity, but for the queen who had once stood alone. Now she did not. When the dust settled for a brief moment, we crouched together in the shadow of a ruined wall. Her hand, trembling yet unyielding, brushed my arm. "Why do you stay?" she asked, her voice like cracked crystal, breaking yet beautiful. I wanted to tell her the truth. That somewhere in the fire and fury, I had found something worth living and dying for. Instead, I only whispered, "Because no one else will." Her gaze softened, the faintest trace of gratitude breaking through. The queen's mask. And in that silence, I knew that whatever storm awaited us, I had already chosen my place within it, at her side, as her last shield. The retreat was brutal, every step a battle as enemy soldiers swarmed the ravaged plain. Serenia's blood trailed behind us, marking a path like a scar upon the land. I half carried her through smoke and debris, my shoulder burning with wounds I could no longer count. She should have been the one protecting her people, leading with pride, but fate had reversed our roles. Now I was dragging the queen of a star-spanning empire through the dirt, her crown shattered, her dignity under threat. She tried to protest, weak words falling like ash, but I silenced her with a grim look. She wasn't just a monarch anymore. She was flesh and blood, and I refused to let her be reduced to a prize for her enemies. The ruined stronghold we found was little more than crumbling stone, yet it gave us a brief sanctuary. I laid her down against the wall, where moonlight filtered through broken beams and cast her in a fragile glow. She winced as I pressed cloth to her wounds, my hands shaking more from fear than pain. Each breath she took was a victory, each heartbeat, a rebellion against the fate that stalked her. She studied me through half-lidded eyes, seeing past my scars and weary frame, as though searching for the reason I stayed. I had none to give, at least not in words, but the truth was carved into my very actions. I stayed because she mattered more than I had ever expected. Her voice, faint but steady, carried in the silence. "You should have left me. The Empire needs a warrior, not a martyr." I met her gaze, fire against fire, and for the first time I dared to defy her. "You are not your Empire. You are more than a symbol, Serenia." She blinked at my use of her name, as though the sound of it stripped away the weight of her crown. For a heartbeat, she wasn't the alien queen or the figurehead of resistance. She was simply a woman on the edge of despair. And in that fragile moment, I swore again, not in oaths or ceremony, but in the quiet act of refusing to leave her side. Outside, the sounds of war still echoed, a grim reminder that the galaxy was still burning. But here, in this broken stronghold, there was a silence that carried its own kind of power. I cleaned her wounds as best I could, my clumsy hands made careful by necessity, my eyes never leaving hers for long. She did not flinch or turn away, though every touch must have seared her. Instead, she studied me as though I were a riddle worth solving. I wondered what she saw: a soldier out of place, a fool risking everything, or perhaps the faintest hint of something she had lost long ago, hope. As dawn crept over the horizon, Serenia stirred with renewed fire in her veins. Her body was still weak, but her spirit refused to bow. She whispered plans, her words weaving strategies of retreat and survival, her voice regaining strength with each command. Yet, as she spoke, her eyes kept finding mine, anchoring her resolve, in my presence. I realized then that my shield was not only of flesh and steel, but of faith, the belief that together we could turn the tide. And as the sun rose over the shattered battlefield, I knew that I had stepped into a role larger than any I had imagined. I was no longer just shielding her body, I was shielding her will to fight. The enemy did not rest. Scouts prowled the fields, seeking to confirm the Queen's death. Rumors spread like wildfire that Serenia had fallen, that her empire had no leader left. Those whispers emboldened her enemies and threatened to break her allies. We could not let them find us, not in her fragile state. I prepared our escape with grim determination, scavenging weapons and supplies from the ruins. Every step carried risk, every sound felt like a predator stalking us. Yet the Queen, despite her wounds, stood beside me, her will as unbreakable as the crown she had once worn. She refused to remain hidden, and I refused to let her walk alone. We moved through the ruins like shadows, my hand steadying her when her strength faltered. Her presence was a paradox, fragile in body, but blazing in spirit. There were moments when her breath caught, when her steps wavered, and I would catch her, hold her steady, and she would nod, silently thanking me before moving forward again. It was in those small moments that something unspoken grew between us, stronger than oaths, stronger than fear. She trusted me, and that trust was heavier than any burden I had ever borne. At dusk, we reached a hidden passage carved into the cliffs, an ancient route used by smugglers. From there, we could reach the outer lands where loyalists still fought in her name. But the enemy had anticipated this, and soon the narrow path echoed with the tramp of boots and the hum of plasma rifles. We were trapped between collapse and capture, and Serenya's hand went to her sword, though her arm shook from weakness. I stepped forward, placing myself between her and the advancing soldiers, my rifle raised. She opened her mouth to protest, but I cut her off with a look. This was not her fight. Not now. She had fought enough. This time, I would stand. The clash was brutal, steel and fire meeting flesh and desperation. I moved with a clarity born of purpose, each strike fueled by more than rage. It was loyalty, defiance, and something deeper. Behind me, Serenya's presence was like a beacon, steadying me when the weight of the enemy threatened to crush me. Every time I faltered, I thought of her crown, her courage, and the moment her hand had trembled against mine. That was enough to keep me standing when I should have fallen. By the time the last enemy fell, my body was battered and bloodied, but we still stood. Serenya's hand touched my shoulder, steadying me even though she herself leaned on the wall for balance. "You fight like a man with nothing left to lose," she said softly, her eyes shining with something unspoken. I met her gaze, breathless but resolute. "Not nothing," I replied. "Not anymore." The silence that followed spoke louder than any words could. We were no longer queen and soldier, no longer human and alien. We were two souls bound by battle, bound by something deeper than either of us dared name. The loyalist outpost lay hidden in the wastelands, a cluster of crumbling towers fortified by those still faithful to Serenya's name. Getting there required passing through enemy-patrolled plains where every shadow carried the risk of discovery. Serenya insisted on walking despite her injuries, her pride refusing to let me carry her, but I could see how each step drained her strength. The queen who once commanded fleets across the stars was now struggling against her own body, and yet I had never admired her more. Her defiance against weakness was more inspiring than any crown. At night, as she rested, I kept guard, my rifle steady and my gaze fixed on the horizon, knowing that if we were found, I would once again become the shield between her and death. When we finally reached the outskirts of the outpost, the loyalist guards aimed their weapons at us before recognition softened their stance. To them, Serenya's appearance was like the rising of the sun after endless night, proof that their queen had not abandoned them. She addressed them with quiet authority, her voice steady despite her weakened frame. "Your queen still stands," she declared, and for a moment I felt the tide of despair shift. They welcomed us in, tending to her wounds with reverence, though their eyes often flicked toward me, the human outsider who shadowed her every step. To them, I was both strange and suspect, yet Serenya's trust in me silenced their doubts. That night, the council of loyalist leaders gathered, their faces hardened by war but softened by the sight of their queen alive. They begged her to lead them once more, to strike back at the enemy and reclaim her throne. Serenya listened with patience, but I noticed her eyes often shifting toward me, as though weighing their fervor against the quiet strength I offered. When they finished, she spoke with clarity. "To fight recklessly is to die in vain. We must be cunning, not just brave." Her words carried the edge of strategy, but there was something deeper in them too. She was no longer the queen who fought, alone on the battlefield. She had learned, perhaps from me, that survival sometimes required leaning on another. As the council debated tactics, I remained silent, content to stand behind her. But when they turned to me, asking what a human soldier thought of their cause, I could not remain still. I told them the truth, that Serenya was not just their leader, but their hope, and hope had to be preserved, not squandered in reckless charges. My words carried weight not because of eloquence, but because of conviction. They saw it in my stance, in the scars on my body, in the way I stood between them and their queen without hesitation. Serenya's gaze lingered on me afterward, and, though she said nothing, her eyes spoke volumes. Later, in the quiet of her chambers, Serenia confronted me. "You speak as though you are bound to me," she said softly, her tone a mixture of curiosity and something more fragile. I met her gaze without flinching. "I am," I admitted. "Not by crown or command, but by choice." For a moment, the Queen's mask slipped, and I saw the woman beneath. The loneliness, the exhaustion, the fragile thread of trust she had placed in me. She did not reply, but her hand brushed mine as she passed, lingering just long enough to send a fire through my veins. That night I realized the truth. My role was no longer only to protect her body or her throne, but to guard the very heart she kept hidden from the world. The days that followed were filled with planning. Serenia worked tirelessly with her commanders, piecing together fragments of intelligence into a strategy that could turn the war. The enemy believed her dead or dying, and that ignorance was our greatest weapon. If she could strike at the right time, with precision rather than brute force, the Empire might rally behind her once more. I watched her pore over maps and data, her mind a storm of calculation, and I marveled at her resilience. Even broken, she was formidable, her will like tempered steel. Yet in the rare moments when the Council left us alone, I saw the toll it took on her. The winces of pain, the tremors in her hands, the quiet sighs when she thought no one was listening. It was during one such night that she confessed the truth. "I thought death had claimed me on that battlefield," she whispered, her eyes fixed on the flickering glow of a lantern. "And then you were there. You stood where no one else would." I did not know how to answer, so I simply said, "I couldn't let you fall." She turned to me then, her gaze piercing, searching for something in my face. "Why?" she pressed. And though I struggled to find words, I finally said the only thing I knew to be true. "Because you mattered to me." The silence that followed was heavy, but it was not uncomfortable. She did not rebuke me, nor did she turn away. Instead, she simply nodded, as though acknowledging something long unspoken. The strategy we forged required more than soldiers. It required deception. Serenia proposed that she remain hidden, her survival kept secret until the decisive strike. Meanwhile, I was tasked with leading raids alongside her most trusted captains, using my outsider's perspective to anticipate the enemy's moves. I was reluctant to leave her side, but she insisted. "If I am to reclaim my throne, I must be more than a symbol. You must help me become the weapon they do not expect." I accepted, though it tore at me to step away. Every mission carried danger, and yet I carried her presence with me, her voice in my mind, her strength in my blood. The raids were brutal, striking supply lines, sabotaging weapon caches, and spreading rumors of Serenia's return. Each time, I returned, battered and weary. Serenia was there, waiting. She greeted me not as a soldier, but as something more, her eyes softening when they found me among the crowd. In those moments, the war faded, and we were simply two souls bound by shared survival. She never spoke of what grew between us, nor did I. But the unspoken became undeniable. A glance, a touch, a moment of silence. These were our confessions, woven in the spaces between battle and blood. The loyalists began to whisper too. They saw how Serenia's gaze lingered on me, how she listened when I spoke, how I moved instinctively to shield her even in the council hall. To them, it was both strange and wondrous. The Queen, untouchable and divine, showing humanity in ways they had never seen. Some disapproved, but none dared question her. And I, though aware of their stares, cared little. For me, the war had already been decided. I would stand as her shield until the last breath, no matter what world or crown demanded otherwise. The Loyalist stronghold had become a hive of restless energy, filled with the sound of forging weapons and whispered prayers. Serenia walked among her people, her presence both balm and fire, igniting courage where despair had once lived. I shadowed her every step, my eyes scanning for threats, though my mind was consumed by something more dangerous, the growing weight of what I felt for her. Every time she glanced at me, every time her hand brushed mine as we passed through crowded halls, I was reminded that my role as her protector was no longer enough. She was not just my queen, she was the heartbeat that kept me tethered to life. And though war demanded discipline, love had already breached my defenses. One evening, Serenia summoned me to the war chamber, its walls lined with maps etched into glowing hollow screens. She stood before the display like a general of old, her gaze sharp and unyielding, but when she turned to me, her voice softened. "The time has come to reclaim what was stolen," she said. Her plan was audacious: strike the capital directly, severing the head of the rebellion in a single blow. It would require precision, deception, and sacrifice. As she laid out the strategy, I felt both awe and dread. To see her mind at work was to witness brilliance, but I also knew that this plan would place her in mortal danger. And if she fell this time, I could not bear it. We argued, quietly at first, then with fire. I told her she could not risk herself, that her people needed her alive more than they needed her leading the charge. But Serenia only shook her head, her voice filled with conviction. "A queen who hides while others bleed is no queen at all." I hated her words because they were true. Yet as she spoke, I saw the weight she carried, the burden of a crown, the ghosts of those lost, the unyielding expectation of a people who believed her divine. For a moment, I wanted to rip that burden from her shoulders, to tell her she was allowed to be simply Serenia, a woman with a beating heart. But I knew that choice had been taken from her the day she was born. The night before the campaign, we found ourselves alone on the balcony of the fortress. The stars stretched across the sky like a silent audience. Serenia stood beside me, the cold wind catching her silver hair, her face etched with both strength and sorrow. "Do you ever wonder," she asked quietly, "what life might have been had we been born without war?" Her words struck me like a blade because I had thought of little else. "Every day," I admitted, my voice thick. She turned then, her eyes shining with something unspoken, and before doubt could steal the moment, her lips found mine. It was a kiss not of royalty or command, but of raw humanity, fragile, desperate, and undeniable. In that instant, I knew I would die 1,000 deaths before letting her fall again. The assault on the capital began with shadows, not fire. Loyalist saboteurs infiltrated the city first, cutting power lines, collapsing supply routes, and feeding false intelligence to the rebels. Serenia's forces moved like whispers, appearing where least expected, striking fast before vanishing into the night. I led one such unit, guiding them through labyrinthine streets, every step a dance with death. Though I had trained for war my entire life, nothing compared to the intensity of fighting for something more than survival. I was fighting for her, for the chance that her world might rise from ashes, and for the bond we had forged in blood and silence. As the city crumbled into chaos, Serenia revealed herself. She strode into the heart of the capital not as a fugitive queen, but as a conqueror reborn. The sight of her ignited her people like a spark to dry tinder. Cries of her name echoed from rooftops and alleyways, and soldiers once beaten now charged with renewed fury. The rebellion, caught off guard by her sudden presence, faltered. Yet even as victory loomed, danger grew sharper. Assassins lurked among the rebels, their blades and rifles seeking her life above all others. More than once I intercepted them, my body moving faster than thought, each strike fueled by the memory of that kiss beneath the stars. The turning point came at the palace gates, where the rebellion's general, Serenia's former advisor turned traitor, confronted us with his elite guard. He sneered as he saw me at her side, calling me a pet human, unworthy of standing beside a queen. Rage burned through me, but Serenya's hand on my arm steadied me. "Words are wind," she said. Together, we faced the enemy in a battle that tore through the marble steps, our blades and rifles singing in the firelit night. Serenya fought like the storm itself, every movement a reminder that she was not just a ruler, but a warrior forged in flame. And I, though only human, fought as her shield, my body absorbing blows meant for her, my will refusing to yield. The rebels were driven back, their lines shattered, but the traitor himself slipped through, retreating into the palace. Serenya would not let him escape, not after all he had stolen. Against my pleas, she pursued him into the burning halls, her determination unshakable. I followed close behind, my lungs choked with smoke, my eyes straining through the firelight. Every step echoed with dread, for I knew this confrontation would decide more than a throne. It would decide whether she would remain my queen or become another ghost carved into my heart. The battle within the palace was chaos incarnate. Fire devoured gilded walls, smoke curled through shattered windows, and the clash of steel reverberated. Through the corridors, Serenya moved with deadly grace, cutting down those who stood between her and the traitor, while I kept the assassins from reaching her flank. But the palace was a labyrinth, and every turn felt like a trap. My instincts screamed that we were walking into the jaws of death, yet neither of us faltered. For her, it was justice. For me, it was duty and love. At last, we cornered him in. The throne room, the seat of power, now surrounded by flames. The traitor stood tall, his blade gleaming, his eyes filled with hatred and betrayal. He mocked Serenya, calling her weak for relying on a human, accusing her of abandoning her empire. For sentiment, Serenya's reply was a roar of defiance. "Love is not weakness," she declared, her voice carrying through the inferno. "It is strength greater than any throne." Her words struck me like lightning, for I knew they were meant not just for him, but for me as well. The fight that followed was brutal. Serenya and I fought side by side, our movements instinctively in sync, every strike complementing the other. Where I faltered, she surged forward. Where she stumbled, I was there, to shield her. The traitor was skilled, his fury unmatched, but he faced not one opponent, but two souls bound by something deeper than loyalty. In the end, Serenya's blade found its mark, piercing his chest with the weight of 1,000 broken oaths. As he fell, the palace groaned around us, fire consuming its once proud pillars. The throne he had stolen crumbled beneath the flames, leaving only ash. We staggered from the burning hall, our bodies battered, our hearts pounding. Outside, the loyalist forces cheered, their voices echoing across the city. The rebellion was broken, its leader dead, its cause in ruins. Serenya stood tall before her people, her crown tarnished but her spirit unbroken. Yet as they hailed her victory, her eyes sought only mine. For in that moment, amid the smoke and the ash, we both knew the truth. The war was not over, but our bond had become the foundation of something greater than empire. That night, when silence finally settled over the city, Serenya and I stood together beneath the stars once more. She reached for my hand, her fingers trembling not from fear but from release. "You were my shield," she whispered. "But more than that, you are my strength." I had no crown to offer, no empire to command, but I gave her the only vow that mattered. That no matter what storms came, no matter what flames consumed, I would stand beside her until the very end. And for the first time, the queen allowed herself to rest, not as a ruler, but as a woman who had found something worth more than any throne. The city still smoldered after the battle, its wounds fresh though its people sang Serenya's name, with reverence. Victory had been won, but it was not peace, only a pause before the next storm. Scouts returned with dire news. Remnants of the rebellion had regrouped beyond the mountains, gathering with mercenaries and foreign allies who saw her weakened throne as an opportunity to strike. Serenia knew that her fight was not over. Her crown rested on a blade's edge, and her people still looked to her with desperate hope. I watched her pace the war chamber, the weight of her decisions etching shadows across her face. She was a queen reborn, but she was also a woman who had whispered her heart to me. That duality was the battlefield I feared most. The council clamored for vengeance, urging Serenia to unleash the full might of her armies and burn the rebels' strongholds to ash. Yet Serenia hesitated. "Another war of fire will only leave us with ruins," she said, her voice steady, though her eyes betrayed exhaustion. She proposed something bolder, an alliance with humanity, my people, whose fleets orbited on the edge of her borders, uncertain whether to intervene. "If we unite, we will not just crush our enemies," she said, turning to me. "We will build a foundation no rebellion can break." Her words struck me with both pride and fear. She was offering more than a pact. She was tying her fate to mine in the eyes of her world. But alliances were never without risk. My own commanders did not trust Serenia, seeing only a queen who had nearly lost her throne to chaos. They feared binding humanity's fate to a realm still bleeding. Yet when I spoke before them, I spoke not just as a soldier, but as a witness. I told them of her courage, of the fire that refused to die in her veins, of how she had turned weakness into strength. My words carried weight not because of rank, but because I had bled beside her. Some called me a fool, blinded by alien beauty, but others listened, stirred by the conviction in my voice. The fate of two worlds now balanced on a fragile thread of trust and love. That night Serenia came to me, her eyes weary yet filled with an intensity that left me breathless. "If they refuse us," she whispered, "I will still fight. But I would rather fight with you at my side, not against you." The vulnerability in her voice struck deeper than any blade. I cupped her face in my hands, feeling the warmth of her skin, the trembling beneath her strength. "Then we will make them see," I vowed. It was no longer just her empire we fought for. It was something greater, a bridge between two peoples, born from love that defied borders. In her eyes, I saw not just a queen, but the woman who had become my reason to live. The rebel stronghold lay hidden in the mountains, a fortress carved into stone and shadow. Serenia led her forces through treacherous passes, her banners flying defiantly despite the risk of ambush. I rode at her side, every sense sharpened by the knowledge that this battle would decide everything. Scouts reported enemy numbers far, greater than expected, bolstered by foreign weapons and mercenaries eager for plunder. The council urged retreat, but Serenia refused. "If we turn back now," she declared, "they will chase us to the heart of the capital. Better we strike here, on ground of our choosing." Her voice rang with conviction, yet I could see the storm in her heart. The battle that followed was unlike any before. Arrows of plasma lit the sky, crashing against shields of light, while the mountains themselves trembled with the thunder of engines and the screams of the dying. Serenia fought at the front, her blade gleaming with defiance, her presence uniting warriors who might otherwise have faltered. I kept close, cutting down those who sought her life, my body moving with a singular purpose, to ensure she lived through this storm. We moved like two parts of the same soul, our strikes and parries flowing together as if war itself had choreographed us. Yet even as victory drew near, the cost grew unbearable. The rebels unleashed a weapon unlike any we had seen, a cannon that tore through shield lines as if they were paper. Its blasts carved craters into the mountainside, scattering Serenya's forces in chaos. Despair threatened to consume us, but Serenya's voice cut through the carnage like thunder. "Hold the line!" she cried, her words igniting a fire in weary hearts. Still, the weapon had to be destroyed, or all was lost. Without hesitation, I volunteered. Serenya's eyes widened in protest, her hand gripping my arm with desperate strength. "No," she said, her voice trembling. "If you fall, I—" Her words broke before they could finish, but I knew what she meant. I kissed her hand, pressing it to my chest. "I swore to be your shield," I said. "Let me keep that vow." Under cover of chaos, I led a small band through the cliffs, scaling the mountainside under fire. Every step was agony, but the thought of Serenya watching me gave me strength no mortal body should have held. We reached the weapon's flank, a massive machine of metal and fire guarded by elites. My comrades fell one by one, buying me seconds at the cost of their lives. Finally, I reached the core, planting charges with shaking hands. The enemy closed in, blades flashing, but I fought like a man possessed, my mind filled only with her face. When the cannon exploded in a storm of flame, the shockwave hurled me into darkness. My last thought before it claimed me was that I had kept my promise. I awoke in a haze of pain, the world blurred and broken. Serenya was there, kneeling at my side, her hands trembling as they pressed against my wounds. Her face was streaked with blood and ash, but her eyes shone with fierce relief. "You fool," she whispered, her voice cracking. "You were not meant to die before me." I tried to smile, though every breath burned. "You needed a shield," I rasped. "And I was there." She shook her head, tears falling onto my skin, her strength breaking for the first time. "You are not just my shield," she said. "You are my heart." In that moment, amid the ruin of war, she was not queen or warrior, but the woman who had risked everything for love. The battle ended in victory. With the weapon destroyed, Serenya's forces rallied, driving the rebels into the cliffs until none remained. The mountains burned with the fire of their defeat, and her banners flew high in triumph. Yet the price had been steep, too many graves for one queen to mourn. When Serenya stood before her people, her crown gleaming in the ashes, she did not speak of conquest or vengeance. Instead, she spoke of unity, of the strength found not in thrones but in bonds between hearts. And when she took my hand before them all, gasps filled the air. "This human stood as my shield," she declared, "and I will build a future not of chains, but of love that binds worlds together." Her words rippled across both empires, stirring debate, fear, and wonder. Some called her mad, others called her visionary. But for those who had seen the fires of war, they understood. Humanity and her people began to speak as allies, tentative but hopeful, building bridges from the ashes of blood. I stood at her side not as a soldier or protector, but as the man she had chosen, the man who had chosen her in turn. The crown no longer seemed a burden, because she no longer carried it alone. Together we bore it, not for power, but for the promise of a dawn no war could extinguish. In the quiet that followed, Serenya and I found a rare peace. We walked through gardens reborn, hand in hand, speaking not of battles, but of dreams. She confessed her fears, her regrets, and her hopes, and I did the same. No throne, no crown, no title could ever match the simple truth of those moments, that we had found each other in the fire, and that love had survived where empires nearly fell. When she smiled at me, I no longer saw a queen. I saw the woman who had made me whole. And so the story ended not with the fall of a kingdom, but with the rise of something greater, a queen who had chosen love over isolation, a soldier who had chosen devotion over duty, and two worlds that had found unity in their bond. The scars of war would never fade, but neither would the memory of what we had fought for. For when the alien queen fell, I stood as her last shield, and together we rose from the ashes into a future neither of us had dared to dream.